The courtroom camera captured something that would break the internet and redefine what it means to face consequences on national television. Karen Davidson, a 42-year-old woman who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of manipulation, sat in Judge Judy's courtroom with a confidence that could only come from a lifetime of never being held accountable. Her low-cut blouse, overly applied makeup, and practiced hair toss were tools she had wielded like weapons against every male authority figure who had ever dared to challenge her. But what Karen didn't know as she adjusted her necklace and prepared her most charming smile was that she was about to attempt the most catastrophic manipulation in television history. Within the next 18 minutes, Judge Judy would deliver a verbal destruction so precise, so utterly devastating, that the clip would be viewed over 80 million times across every social media platform. Karen Davidson walked into that courtroom thinking her tried-and-true tactics would work one more time. She walked out as the most humiliated woman in America, her reputation destroyed, her manipulation exposed, and her face permanently associated with what happens when weaponized femininity meets a woman who built her career on seeing through lies. Before we show you the exact moment Karen tried to flirt with Judge Judy and the savage response that made millions of viewers stand up and cheer, you need to understand who Karen Davidson really was. This wasn't just another entitled suburban mom having a bad day. This was a calculated predator who had turned manipulation into an art form, who had weaponized her appearance and false victimhood to escape consequences for over a decade. Karen had mastered a specific type of manipulation that made her particularly dangerous. She targeted male authority figures with a precision that would make a military strategist jealous. Traffic court judges, building inspectors, police officers, business owners, HR managers. If they were male and held power over her situation, Karen knew exactly how to work them. A strategic lean forward here, a breathy laugh there, compliments wrapped in helplessness, and a subtle suggestion that surely they could work something out if they just gave her a chance. It had worked flawlessly for 15 years. She had racked up dozens of traffic violations that mysteriously disappeared after courthouse meetings. Building code violations for her home-based business that inspectors suddenly decided weren't worth pursuing. Even a DUI arrest that got reduced to reckless driving after what the arresting officer's colleagues later described as an inappropriately friendly interaction. But Karen's most devastating pattern emerged in her professional life, where she had turned workplace interactions into a minefield of manipulation and false accusations. She had been fired from 4 different companies over the past decade, and each time she had filed sexual harassment lawsuits that painted her as an innocent victim of male aggression. What her employers couldn't prove, what they could only whisper about in settlement negotiations, was that Karen was the aggressor. She would target male supervisors with increasingly inappropriate behavior, flirtation that crossed professional lines, comments that made coworkers uncomfortable, and boundary violations that HR departments struggled to document. Then, the moment her behavior was addressed or her job performance questioned, Karen would flip the script entirely. Suddenly she was the victim. Suddenly every professional criticism became gender discrimination. Suddenly every male colleague who had felt uncomfortable with her advances became her harasser. And when pressed, when confronted with evidence of her own inappropriate behavior, Karen had one final weapon in her arsenal. She would cry, she would flirt with the male decision-makers handling her case, and she would walk away with settlement checks that funded her lifestyle while destroying the reputations of innocent men. The case that brought Karen to Judge Judy's courtroom involved Robert Chen, a 58-year-old small business owner who ran a successful insurance agency in suburban Connecticut. Robert was exactly the kind of man Karen typically targeted. Soft-spoken, conflict-averse, someone who had built his business on treating people fairly and avoiding drama. When Karen applied for the office manager position 3 years ago, she seemed perfect on paper. Experienced, articulate, confident. Robert had no way of knowing he was inviting a predator into his professional family. For the first few months, Karen performed adequately. But slowly, subtly, Robert's other employees began coming to him with complaints. Karen was making inappropriate comments to male agents. She was touching arms and shoulders in ways that made people uncomfortable. She was dressing increasingly inappropriately for a professional office environment. When Robert gently tried to address the situation, Karen's response was textbook manipulation. She laughed it off, touched his arm, and suggested he was just being too sensitive. Surely a successful businessman like himself understood that a little friendliness was good for office morale. The situation escalated over the next 2 years. Male employees began documenting interactions with Karen, refusing to be alone with her, and several threatened to quit if something wasn't done. Robert's wife, who handled the company's HR functions, compiled a file that would make any lawyer's hair stand on end. Text messages where Karen bragged to friends about having the boss wrapped around her finger. Security footage showing her deliberately engineering situations where she would be alone with male employees. Recorded conversations where she explicitly discussed using harassment complaints as leverage if Robert ever tried to fire her. When Robert finally worked up the courage to terminate Karen's employment, her response was swift and predictable. Within 48 hours, she had filed a lawsuit claiming sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and wrongful termination. She was suing for $75,000 in damages, claiming Robert had created a hostile work environment and fired her for rejecting his advances. It was a complete fabrication, but it was also Karen's standard playbook. And it had always worked before. What Karen Davidson didn't know as she prepared for her television court appearance was that Judge Judy Scheindlin had already spent 3 days reviewing every piece of evidence in the case. This wasn't some overworked civil court judge who would skim the files and hope for the best. This was a woman who had built a television empire on her ability to spot liars within the first 30 seconds of meeting them. Judge Judy's research team had compiled a background report on Karen that read like a manual on workplace manipulation. They had tracked down former employers, interviewed HR managers who had dealt with Karen's accusations, and most damning of all, they had obtained recordings and text messages that Karen assumed had been destroyed in previous settlements. Judge Judy knew exactly what Karen Davidson was before the woman ever walked through her courtroom doors. What she didn't know was whether Karen would be arrogant enough to try her manipulation tactics on a female judge. Judge Judy was actually curious to see if Karen had any self-awareness at all, or if 15 years of successfully manipulating men had made her believe she was truly untouchable. The morning of the taping, Karen Davidson spent 2 hours getting ready. She selected her outfit with the precision of a general planning a military campaign. The blouse was professional enough to not be obvious, but cut low enough to be distracting. The skirt was pencil style, emphasizing her figure while technically being courtroom appropriate. Her makeup was heavier than normal, designed to look good on camera while projecting a carefully crafted image of feminine vulnerability. She practiced her expressions in the mirror. The innocent wide-eyed look when accused of something. The hurt pout when someone was being mean to her. The grateful smile when someone showed her kindness. And most importantly, the subtle flirtatious expression that suggested maybe, just maybe, they could work something out between them. Karen had used these expressions so many times they were second nature. She genuinely believed that Judge Judy, despite being a woman, would respond to charm and femininity. After all, even female judges wanted to feel appreciated and respected. Karen planned to compliment Judge Judy's accomplishments, reference their shared experiences as women in professional settings, and subtly suggest that surely 2 intelligent women could see through Robert Chen's obvious lies. When Karen walked into the courtroom, every person in the audience immediately noticed something was off. This wasn't typical courtroom attire. Production assistants exchanged glances. The bailiff raised an eyebrow. And Judge Judy, who had been reviewing her notes, looked up with an expression that regular viewers would have recognized immediately. It was the look of a predator who had just spotted prey that didn't know it was being hunted. Karen, completely oblivious to the danger she was in, actually smiled at Judge Judy as she took her position at the plaintiff's stand. She didn't just stand there normally like every other plaintiff in television history. She angled her body slightly toward Judge Judy, shifted her weight to one hip in a pose that she believed was flattering, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture she had used successfully countless times before. The audience, made up mostly of retirees who had been watching Judge Judy for decades, collectively held their breath. They sensed something unprecedented was about to happen. Judge Judy began with her standard opening, her voice carrying the no-nonsense authority that had made her a television icon. Ms. Davidson, you're suing Mr. Chen for $75,000 claiming sexual harassment and wrongful termination. Tell me about your employment with his company. It was a simple, straightforward question. A normal plaintiff would have answered directly with facts and dates. But Karen Davidson wasn't a normal plaintiff. She took a deep breath that was clearly designed to draw attention to her neckline, leaned forward slightly, and began speaking in a voice that had dropped an octave into what she clearly believed was a sultry, confidential tone. Your Honor, first I just want to say what an honor it is to appear before someone as accomplished and respected as yourself. As a woman trying to make it in a male-dominated field, I've always admired how you've broken barriers and refused to let men push you around. The compliment was so transparently manipulative that several audience members actually gasped. Judge Judy's expression didn't change, but those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes. The predator was getting ready to strike, but not yet. Not until Karen had dug her hole deep enough that there would be no escape. Karen continued, apparently taking Judge Judy's silence as encouragement. She described her employment with Robert Chen, but instead of focusing on facts, she kept adding unnecessary personal details clearly designed to paint herself as a victim of male aggression. Your Honor, as a single woman in her 40s, I'm sure you understand how difficult it is when men in positions of power think they can take advantage of us. She touched her necklace, a gesture that drew the eye downward. I worked so hard for Mr. Chen, staying late, going above and beyond, and he took that dedication as an invitation for something more. Her voice took on a breathy quality as she described completely fabricated instances of Robert making advances toward her. She threw in details about working late alone with him, about him complimenting her appearance, about feeling uncomfortable but not knowing what to do because she needed the job. It was a performance she had given before in other courtrooms, other depositions, other settlement negotiations. It had always worked on male judges and male mediators who wanted to believe they were protecting a vulnerable woman from a predatory employer. Judge Judy let her continue, asking occasional questions that Karen interpreted as interest but were actually setting traps. What specifically did Mr. Chen say to you that made you uncomfortable? Karen's answer included so many specific quotes that anyone paying attention would realize she had rehearsed this story extensively. When did you first report this behavior to Human Resources? Karen stumbled slightly on this one because there was no HR report, so she pivoted to explaining that she was too afraid, that she thought she could handle it herself, that women in her position often feel powerless against their male bosses. With each answer, she became more confident, more certain that her strategy was working. She started directing her answers specifically to Judge Judy, making eye contact that lasted just a bit too long, smiling in a way that suggested they shared some secret understanding as women navigating a man's world. The turning point came when Judge Judy asked a question that would expose the foundation of Karen's entire fabricated case. Ms. Davidson, you claim Mr. Chen made unwanted advances toward you over a 2-year period. During this time, did you ever document these incidents, send emails to yourself creating a record, or tell anyone outside the company what was happening? It was a standard question, the kind any competent judge would ask in a harassment case. But Karen's answer would reveal everything about her true nature and her fundamental misunderstanding of who she was dealing with. Instead of admitting she had no documentation because nothing had actually happened, Karen doubled down on her victim narrative while simultaneously making the catastrophic decision to escalate her manipulation tactics. She let out a small, sad laugh and said, Your Honor, you know how it is. When you're in that situation, you're not thinking about documentation. You're just trying to survive each day. She paused for effect, then made her first critical error. She stepped out from behind the plaintiff's stand without being invited to do so. The bailiff immediately tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward Karen as protocol demanded, but Judge Judy raised a single finger to stop him. She wanted to see exactly how far Karen would go. How much rope this manipulator would take to hang herself. Karen, interpreting the lack of immediate rejection as permission, walked several steps closer to Judge Judy's bench. Her heels clicked on the courtroom floor with each step, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent room. She was now standing in a space that no plaintiff in Judge Judy's 25-year television career had ever dared to occupy uninvited. The audience members looked at each other in shock. Production crew who had seen thousands of cases filmed in this courtroom exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even Robert Chen, the defendant, sat frozen in disbelief at what he was witnessing. Karen smoothed down her skirt in a gesture that was clearly designed to draw attention to her figure, tilted her head in what she must have believed was an endearing angle, and committed the act that would define her life from that moment forward. Your Honor, Karen said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, surely a woman as beautiful and successful as yourself understands that sometimes we have to use our assets to survive in this world. She actually gestured to herself as she said the word assets, making it crystal clear what she meant. I'm sure in your career you've had to deal with men who underestimated you because of your appearance. I'm sure you understand that sometimes we have to play the game to get ahead. The implication was staggering in its audacity. Karen was suggesting that Judge Judy, a woman who had built her reputation on integrity and competence, had used her femininity to advance her career. That they were sisters in manipulation, women who understood that flirtation and appearance were legitimate tools in a man's world. Karen was so confident in her approach that she actually reached out her hand as if to touch Judge Judy's bench in a gesture of conspiratorial solidarity. "Maybe after the show," Karen continued, her voice dropping even lower, "we could grab coffee and discuss this woman to woman. I feel like you really understand where I'm coming from, and I'd love to hear your perspective on dealing with difficult men in business." The courtroom didn't just go silent. It went dead. The kind of silence that happens right before an explosion, right before a disaster, right before everything changes forever. Judge Judy's face, which had maintained professional composure throughout Karen's entire performance, transformed in an instant. Her eyes, which had been carefully neutral, turned to ice. Her jaw tightened. Her posture, already commanding, became absolutely rigid with controlled fury. When she spoke, her voice cut through the courtroom like a blade through silk. "Sit down. Now." Each word was delivered separately, distinctly, with the kind of authority that made grown attorneys with themselves on national television. But Karen, incredibly, didn't immediately understand the danger she was in. She had been rejected before by authority figures, but always gently, always with some embarrassment on their part, always with the door left open for settlement negotiations. She gave a nervous laugh, the kind that suggested Judge Judy was being too serious, that they could still salvage this interaction with a little humor. "Your Honor, I just thought," Karen began, but she never finished that sentence. Judge Judy's hand slammed down on her bench with a crack that made every person in the courtroom jump. "You thought wrong," Judge Judy said, her voice now carrying the full weight of 25 years of judicial experience and zero tolerance for manipulation. "You thought you could walk into my courtroom and use the same tactics that have worked on weak-minded male judges. You thought batting your eyelashes and suggesting coffee dates would somehow influence my judgment. You thought I was just another authority figure you could manipulate with your rehearsed vulnerability and strategic cleavage." The words hit Karen like physical blows. Her smile finally began to fade as the first flicker of genuine fear crossed her face. She took a step backward, her hand reaching behind her for the plaintiff's stand to steady herself, but Judge Judy wasn't done. Not even close. "Ms. Davidson, I want you to return to your position and stand there silently while I explain something to you that apparently no one in your 42 years has had the courage to say." Karen stumbled back to the plaintiff's stand, her earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror at what was about to happen. Judge Judy reached down and pulled out a manila folder that Karen had not noticed before. It was thick, stuffed with documents, and as Judge Judy opened it with deliberate slowness, Karen's face began to lose its color. "Before you continue embarrassing yourself further," Judge Judy said, her voice now calm but carrying a menace that was far more terrifying than her earlier anger, "I think we need to discuss your history with male authority figures and your pattern of weaponizing false accusations." Judge Judy pulled out the first document from the manila folder with the precision of a surgeon selecting the perfect scalpel. The paper made a crisp sound in the silent courtroom, and Karen Davidson's hands began to tremble visibly. This was no longer a case about wrongful termination. This had become a public autopsy of 15 years of manipulation, lies, and weaponized victimhood. Judge Judy's voice was steady, clinical, and absolutely merciless as she began to read. "Traffic Court, Hartford, Connecticut, June 2019. You were cited for driving 73 miles per hour in a 45 mile per hour zone, your third speeding violation in 18 months. According to the notes from Judge William Patterson, you appeared in his chambers wearing what he described as inappropriate attire for court, made numerous comments about his intelligence and fairness, and the ticket was dismissed. Would you like to explain that, Ms. Davidson?" Karen opened her mouth but no sound came out. Judge Judy didn't wait for an answer. She pulled out another document. "Building Code Enforcement, Fairfield County, August 2020. Inspector Michael Rodriguez cited your home-based business for 6 separate violations including improper electrical work and unpermitted structural changes. According to his supervisor's report, Inspector Rodriguez suddenly decided the violations were minor despite photographic evidence to the contrary. His supervisor also noted that Rodriguez seemed uncomfortable discussing the case and requested not to be assigned to your property again. Interesting, wouldn't you say?" Karen's face had gone from pale to gray. Her earlier confidence had transformed into visible panic as she realized Judge Judy had done something no other authority figure had ever bothered to do. She had connected the dots. She had called the previous judges, the inspectors, the officers, the employers. She had built a timeline of manipulation that Karen had assumed was safely buried in sealed settlements and dropped charges. Judge Judy continued with devastating precision. Westport Police Department, November 2021. You were arrested for driving under the influence with a blood alcohol content of 0.12, 50% above the legal limit. The arresting officer was Sergeant James Morrison, 28 years old, single, and according to his partner's statement, you spent the entire ride to the station flirting with him, giving him your phone number, and suggesting you could make the situation go away if he just gave you a chance. The courtroom audience gasped audibly. This was beyond anything they had expected from what seemed like a simple workplace dispute. Judge Judy pulled out a photograph and held it up. This is Sergeant Morrison's body camera footage, Ms. Davidson. Should we play it for the court? Should we show America exactly how you manipulate male authority figures? Karen finally found her voice, and it came out as a desperate whisper. That's not relevant to this case. You can't bring up things from my past. That's character assassination. Judge Judy's laugh was sharp and humorless. Character assassination? Ms. Davidson, I'm not assassinating your character. I'm revealing it. There's a significant difference. She set aside the traffic and police documents and pulled out a much thicker stack of papers. Now let's discuss your employment history, shall we? Because this is where your pattern becomes truly disturbing. Judge Judy read through Karen's employment record with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a capital case. Horizon Marketing Group, 2015 to 2017. You filed a sexual harassment complaint against your supervisor, Marcus Whitfield, claiming he made inappropriate advances. The company settled for $40,000. But what they didn't know, what you made sure they never discovered, was that 3 other employees had complained about your inappropriate behavior toward Mr. Whitfield. Text messages to coworkers bragging about how you were going to get a payday out of the situation. Sound familiar? Karen's hands were now shaking so badly she had to grip the plaintiff's stand to remain upright. Sterling Financial Services, 2017 to 2019. Same pattern. Inappropriate behavior toward male colleagues, HR complaints against you that you countered with harassment accusations, settlement for $35,000. Prestige Realty, 2019 to 2021. You were fired for creating a hostile work environment, immediately filed suit, and settled for $42,000. Judge Judy set down the papers and looked directly at Karen with an expression of absolute disgust. Ms. Davidson, you have made over $200,000 in settlement money by weaponizing sexual harassment laws that were designed to protect actual victims. You have destroyed the careers of innocent men who dared to hold you accountable for your behavior. You have made it harder for real victims of harassment to be believed because employers now question every accusation, wondering if they're dealing with another Karen Davidson. The words landed like hammer blows, each one stripping away another layer of Karen's carefully constructed facade. Judge Judy wasn't finished. She pulled out the final set of documents, and these were the ones that would ultimately destroy Karen completely. Let's talk about Robert Chen's case specifically, shall we? Because your attorney was smart enough not to provide me with these text messages, but Mr. Chen's attorney certainly did. Judge Judy began reading from a series of text exchanges between Karen and her friend Michelle, messages sent during Karen's employment with Robert Chen. December 2022, you texted, "This job is boring but the boss is easy to manipulate. If he ever tries to fire me I'll just cry harassment and get paid." March 2023, Robert tried to talk to me about my outfit today. Perfect. I'm documenting everything for the eventual lawsuit. June 2023, I'm going to start being late and messing up on purpose. When he fires me, I'll have my retirement fund. September 2023, just 2 weeks before you were terminated, Michelle, this is it. Robert's wife is building an HR file against me. Time to flip the script and make him the bad guy. I'm thinking 75,000 should do it. The courtroom erupted. Audience members gasped, some shouted in anger, and Robert Chen put his head in his hands with a mixture of relief and vindication that was visible even on camera. Karen Davidson's face had gone beyond gray to an almost green pallor. Tears were forming in her eyes, but these weren't the strategic tears she had used so successfully in the past. These were tears of genuine panic, the tears of someone who suddenly realized that everything they had built was collapsing. Judge Judy held up her hand for silence and the courtroom immediately obeyed. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that transcended the television format and became something far more significant. This was a moment that would be studied in law schools and women's studies courses for years to come. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes locked on Karen Davidson with an intensity that made the cameras seem to disappear. The audience faded away, until it was just two women in a moment of absolute truth. Ms. Davidson, I am 76 years old. I have presided over more than 20,000 cases in my career. I have seen every type of liar, every variety of manipulator, every breed of predator that walks into a courtroom thinking they can fool me. But you represent something particularly insidious. You represent the weaponization of victimhood. You have taken the real pain, the real trauma, the real struggles of women who have actually been harassed, actually been discriminated against, actually been victimized by men in power, and you have turned it into your personal ATM machine. The words hung in the air like an indictment handed down from the highest court in the land. Karen was openly crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streams that destroyed the carefully applied makeup she had spent 2 hours perfecting that morning. Did you really think, Judge Judy continued, her voice rising with righteous anger, that batting your eyelashes would work on me? Did you honestly believe that leaning forward and suggesting coffee dates would somehow cloud my judgment? I am a woman who spent 25 years in family court in New York dealing with real cases of abuse, real victims who needed protection, real predators who needed to be stopped. And now I'm looking at a different kind of predator. A woman who has made a career out of destroying innocent men and making actual victims less believable in the process. Karen tried to speak, her voice coming out in a choked sob. Your Honor, please, I can explain. Those text messages were taken out of context. I was just venting to a friend. I never meant, Judge Judy cut her off with a single raised hand. You never meant for anyone to find out. That's what you never meant. You never meant for your pattern to be exposed. You never meant for all your victims to be connected. You never meant to face actual consequences for your behavior. The judgment that followed was swift and absolutely devastating. Judge Judy's voice carried the full weight of judicial authority as she delivered her ruling. Ms. Davidson, your lawsuit against Robert Chen is dismissed with prejudice. Not only will you receive $0 in damages, but I am ordering you to pay Mr. Chen $25,000 for the damage you have done to his business reputation, for the legal fees he has incurred defending himself against your false accusations, and for the emotional distress you have caused him and his employees. Karen's legs actually buckled and she had to grab the plaintiff's stand to keep from falling. Furthermore, Judge Judy continued, I am forwarding copies of all evidence presented in this case, including your text messages admitting to fabricating harassment claims, to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential fraud and perjury charges related to your previous settlements. I am also sending this information to the State Bar Association as they may wish to investigate the attorneys who helped you perpetrate these fraudulent claims. The courtroom exploded with applause. It started with one person in the back row and spread like wildfire until the entire audience was on their feet, clapping, cheering, and some even crying with relief at seeing justice finally served. Robert Chen, the quiet small business owner who had nearly lost everything to Karen's false accusations, sat with tears streaming down his face as his attorney patted his shoulder. Judge Judy wasn't quite finished. She stood up from her bench, something she rarely did, and pointed directly at Karen Davidson. Get out of my courtroom. And Ms. Davidson, let me give you one piece of advice that might save you from complete ruin. Stop playing the victim and start taking accountability for the predator you've become. Your looks will fade, your manipulation tactics will stop working, but the damage you've done to real victims will last forever. You should be ashamed of yourself. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot, final and absolute. Karen stumbled from the courtroom, her sobs echoing down the hallway, her life as she knew it completely destroyed in 18 minutes of televised justice. The aftermath was swift and merciless in a way that only social media can deliver. Within 3 hours of the episode airing, clips of Karen's flirtation attempt and Judge Judy's devastating response had been uploaded to every platform imaginable. YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. The hashtag Judge Judy Destroys Karen began trending worldwide within 6 hours. By the end of the first week, the main clip had been viewed over 80 million times, making it the most viral courtroom moment in internet history. Comment sections exploded with reactions from millions of viewers. Women shared their own experiences with manipulative co-workers who weaponized harassment claims. Men shared stories of being falsely accused and having no way to defend themselves. HR professionals thanked Judge Judy for exposing a pattern of behavior that had made their jobs infinitely more difficult. Legal experts appeared on news programs calling it a landmark moment for workplace harassment cases, noting that Judge Judy had done something courts rarely do, expose the difference between legitimate claims and calculated fraud. Karen Davidson's life unraveled with stunning speed. The district attorney's office did indeed open an investigation based on Judge Judy's referral. Two of her previous employers, emboldened by the public exposure, rescinded their settlement agreements and filed civil suits to recover the money they had paid her. The State Professional Licensing Board opened an inquiry into whether Karen had committed fraud in her capacity as a licensed insurance broker. Her social media accounts, which she had carefully curated to present herself as a successful professional woman, were flooded with thousands of comments calling her out as a manipulator and fraud. She deleted everything within 48 hours, but the internet never forgets. Screenshots had been saved, videos had been archived, and her face became permanently associated with false accusations and workplace manipulation. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the broader conversation about harassment, victimhood, and accountability. The case became required viewing in HR training programs across the country, used as an example of how to identify patterns of manipulation versus legitimate complaints. Women's advocacy groups issued statements making clear that Karen Davidson's behavior was not representative of real harassment victims and that her actions had made their work more difficult. Legal scholars wrote papers analyzing how Judge Judy had managed to expose a predator while still maintaining respect for actual victims of harassment. The episode demonstrated that calling out false accusations doesn't diminish real ones, it actually strengthens the credibility of legitimate claims by showing that justice systems can distinguish between truth and manipulation. 6 months after her humiliation on national television, Karen Davidson had lost her insurance broker's license, paid out over $60,000 in judgments and legal fees, and was working retail at a department store under her maiden name. The Patricia Thompson Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting legitimate harassment victims, used her case as a cautionary tale in their training materials. Robert Chen's business not only recovered but expanded, as clients appreciated his integrity in fighting back against false accusations rather than settling quietly. And Judge Judy's response to Karen's flirtation attempt became one of the most quoted moments in television history, a perfect encapsulation of why respect, truth, and accountability will always triumph over manipulation, lies, and weaponized victimhood. If this story of justice finally being served restored your faith in accountability, hit that subscribe button and share this video with anyone who needs to see that manipulation has an expiration date. Drop a comment below about your own experiences with workplace manipulation, whether you've witnessed it or been a victim of it. Because Karen Davidson learned the hardest lesson of her life that day in Judge Judy's courtroom. Real authority cannot be flirted with, real judges cannot be manipulated, and real consequences are always waiting for those who think their looks and lies can replace integrity and truth. Sometimes justice takes years to arrive, but when it does, it arrives with the force of a freight train and the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, leaving no doubt that in the end, the truth always wins.